Bueno, gente, cerramos estas segundas jornadas internacionales sobre intermedialidad con nuestro invitado de honor, Stuart Richards, que ha escrito un libro que yo leí, me pareció muy interesante y para mí es toda una novedad. Es un libro sobre Agatha Christie, Television and Horror, and of course, adaptation. De verdad me pareció que toda esa conexión era muy interesante. Leí el libro y uno descubre cosas nuevas, cosas muy interesantes sobre cómo leer o cómo otros autores pueden leer a Agatha Christie al momento de llevarla, por ejemplo, a televisión. Así que para cerrar estas segundas jornadas intermediales, estamos muy contentos de tener a Stuart Richards con nosotros, que nos viene a hablar un poco sobre su libro sobre Agatha Christie. Welcome, Stuart Richards. Mm,
Thank you.
Nuestra,
Um,
la primera
what,
pregunta es la pregunta más básica. Why Agatha Christie? Why television? And why horror?
Great. So my love for Agatha Christie has been long. I started reading her, I think, in high school. Like many people who discover Agatha Christie. I also discovered her around the same time. While reading her, I also discovered a lot of her stories through adaptations. Through often a lot of her adaptations would play on a Sunday afternoon when you're lounging around at home, not doing much. So for me, Agatha Christie was very much just as much a television experience as it was reading her work. Um, I was wanting to explore, I guess, the contemporary context of her adaptation work. And I was particularly interested in a lot of the BBC series
Yes.
of her work, adapted by Sarah Phelps, the screenwriter. And so originally I was going to look at her work for a journal article, but the more I wrote and the more I looked at her work, the more I realized that it would not fit in the scope of one journal article. Um, so at around that same time, some old colleagues of mine were starting a book series on horror and Gothic media cultures as part of Amsterdam University Press. And so I was able to refashion what I was doing for this journal article for the book. The scope of the book allowed me to explore the history of a lot of her adaptations in relation to horror and Gothic horror. I think that was sort of the depth I needed to really explore this topic. Um, in terms of why television, I think television is a really interesting medium. Looking back at a lot of her earlier adaptations, I think the adaptations change along with how television changes.
Oh,
So, looking at a lot of the Miss Marple television episodes in the 80s, it's a very different experience to watching the Sarah Phelps adaptations, in 2015 onwards. Um, and what was really interesting was how much darker they got as adaptations. They were more violent. They changed the source
yes,
texts
this
in
is
really
part of
interesting ways.
your, that is part of your thesis. Eso es parte de tu tesis. Television is darker.
Yes.
These adaptations are darker than others
Yes.
adaptations. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, that was my initial, I guess, finding, or when I was looking at these series as a cohesive whole. The five of them that were adapted by Sarah Phelps, they were more violent than what's described in the source text. And also what sort of the earlier versions of a lot of those series were. Uh, Witness for the Prosecution, for instance, which was originally a short story, then a stage play. Um, that sort of the adaptation of that one, which was her first one, was really noir-esque, I would say, really kind of drawing on a lot of those film noir tropes, but also really violent. So there's, one really kind of camp moment of this fluffy white cat slowly walking through this pool of blood, and then licking its bloody paws. In And Then There Were None, which I think is my favorite adaptation that Sarah Phelps did, is a really violent series. A lot of the gore is kind of emphasized in these adaptations, more so than what you get in the book or earlier adaptations. And that was really interesting. But the more I also looked at some of the different versions of these adaptations from earlier directors and screenwriters, but also in different countries as well, there is still evidence of horror. There is still evidence of the Gothic in a lot of Agatha Christie's work. You can find it in her actual writing. She plays with the supernatural in really interesting ways. Often it's, to denounce the power of the supernatural. So a really common trope is characters doing a seance, or a character potentially being a witch, but often they're exposed as being false in the original book. But what we get in a lot of adaptations of her work, throughout the 20th century, is there is still that macabre or that kind of darkness in her work. The very first adaptation of And Then There Were None was released on Halloween. And a lot of the promotional material for that film, was all about skeletons and death and all of that. And a lot of the book covers as well, throughout the 70s, you look back, they're really camp, but they really emphasize themes of the Gothic horror. So even though these really recent adaptations for the BBC are more violent, they are darker, they draw more explicitly on horror, filmic cues, they, sort of the horror has always been associated with Agatha Christie.
Cuando uno piensa en Agatha Christie, no piensa en violencia, la verdad. Piensa en mansiones tranquilas, una copita de veneno y no mucho más. Lo interesante del libro de Stuart Richards es que él señala cómo esas adaptaciones sacan esos aspectos oscuros que ya están en el libro. Por ejemplo, su novela más famosa, And There Were None, es básicamente a proto-slasher. Es eso, un montón de gente dentro de un lugar que son asesinados uno a uno. ¿Podría entonces Stuart elaborar un poco la relación entre violencia, Then Were None y el slasher?
Fernando said that when the common people used to think about Agatha Christie, is always thinking about a cottage, a little village, good people, and maybe just a little drop of poison. But not in this really amazing approach of yours, where, for instance, in a place where everybody is about to be killed, as in the book, let me put the proper name, just give me a second.
And Then Were None.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Then Were None. So you find this amazing intersection in the crime fiction tradition and the horror genre uh, itself, with the whole main Gothic cathedral behind them.
Yeah.
And Fernando said that even though this book is maybe kind of a pro slasher approach of yours, so would you please explain us your discovery, your point of view, your insight about how do you get this idea, very fresh and questioning idea? Because after reading that, I said, oh my gosh, it happened in front of me, myself, a horror writer. I said, this happened in front of my face and didn't notice that I'm reading also a horror novel.
Yeah, so I mean, just the point on the slasher film, I think that you know, we can find the traces of the slasher genre in a lot of Agatha Christie's writing. I mean, it is a filmic genre that you know slowly evolved over the 20th century with films like Psycho and then Peeping Tom and then you know, Halloween and Friday the 13th. But in Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, in the book, and then the stage play, we get, you know, characters that are isolated on an island. They
Yes.
can't get out. It's Gothic. So the tone and the mood is really dark. There's like a sense of finality to all of them. They all know they're going to die. And one by one, they get killed. And then someone in the group is revealed to actually be the killer. All of those tropes we see get recreated in the slasher film. One thing that I think is really interesting in terms of our association of Agatha Christie and a lot of her stories being, you know, quaint, the cozy murder genre, you know, often, you know, family-friendly murder mysteries. Certainly, like, we get that in a lot of her work, particularly I think the Miss Marple stories, they often are set in villages.
Yes.
And Miss Marple gets her clues and she talks to suspects over cups of tea and biscuits. Certainly that is there. But I think our association of the cozy murder mystery is also through TV adaptations. So through the 70s and the 80s in Britain, a lot of the adaptations of her work were by ITV and the BBC, and those adaptations had to fit in with the expectations of what television was in the 70s and 80s. You couldn't have blood and guts everywhere on TV in the 70s and 80s, you know, for those audiences. So we associated that family-friendly kind of feel of Agatha Christie just as much through the adaptations of her work and the media representations of her work than what we do with her books. But there were still a lot of adaptations that were getting made around those times that really played with the Gothic. You know, And Then There Were None. There's quite a few versions that really play up the horror elements, or at least some associations of the horror. So there could be some scores in particular scenes during death scenes that would feel like a horror film. Sometimes you would get that classic killer point of view shot of in particular scenes. The Russian adaptation of that film feels like a horror film. And also a lot of radio plays as well of Agatha Christie's work played with sound in ways that drew on the horror. So even though, you know, if you look at them as whole pieces of media, a lot of the time, the earlier adaptations of her work weren't horror texts. They weren't Gothic horror texts, but there are still some kind of traces there of horror and Gothic. But then when we get Sarah Phelps adapting them for, and then there were none, a witness for the prosecution, Ordeal by Innocence, The Pale Horse, which is all about witches, and then I'm forgetting one more. And the ABC Murders, the final one, they are all more explicit in their horror associations.
Con respecto a lo que Stuart está... Yes, yes.
I would like to introduce a question about this explanation of Stuart, if you don't mind. Because you said Miss Marple, of course, our love Mr. Poirot, and the much more in Miss Marple, these small villages where there is nothing to happen any day, any day, and suddenly, splash, and Miss Marple tasting or having a cup of tea and a cookies is trying to develop the situation. But this I would like to know, how do you reconcile, you link in one side these ways of thinking of Mrs. Marple and Mr. Poirot, that they are the thinkers, the order, the logical accomplish of some, given this cause, you have this effect. It doesn't matter who try to, to fog or cover the trace. In one way, we have these typical English criminal crimes or criminal books, the heritage, of course, of Sherlock Holmes, the people rationalizing the status quo and getting to the answer after a process of mind. It's always in the mind. It's like a chess game where after the proper questions to the proper people, they forming the chessboard and saying, this is checkmate, and this is why.
Yeah.
This is in one way. But in the other way, we all know that the Gothic subgenre is itself a chaotic genre. It's not an order genre, because happen many things due to supernatural, due to the evil nature of the man, whatever. But we could resume the whole matter about Gothic subgenre as the epitome of chaos. So how do you cross both visions in order to obtain this, in terms of logic, Aristotelic logic, the synthesis, of the both sides of the same matter, because all of those goes together to form the final solution, or the final outcome of the crime. and the solution of the crime, of course.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, so the Gothic horror is fundamentally about playing with order and disorder, rationality and irrationality. And in a lot of, classic adaptations of Agatha Christie's work and in her work, the source texts, we do get kind of playing and flirting with the disorder and the mess that a murder creates, and the suspicion and the tense atmosphere, particularly in the book Ordeal by Innocence, where the whole family are staying in this big house and they realize one of them is the killer. But the detective, and in most cases it's Poirot or Miss Marple, they represent that kind of reordering of the world by finding the solution. They all get everyone in a room. They go through the crime. All of the clues are put into place. Here is the killer. That's it. And in a lot of her work, I mean, some people might disagree with me, but they are kind of not undeveloped characters, but they don't have a whole lot of backstory, really. We vaguely know that Poirot's a cop. We know that Miss Marple has family members. She's got a nephew who's a writer, but they are just vehicles for us to explore this crime and get the clues. And their role is providing that rationality by the end of the book. What Sarah Phelps does with the BBC adaptations, which angered a lot of the fans of Agatha Christie, they are not popular adaptations. If you look at various review sites or IMDb, for instance, and a lot of the reviews of these series, they're very mixed. People don't like what she did with the source texts. She plays with that rationality in different ways. In some cases, she completely changes who the killer is, and there is still a sense of violence at the end. In Witness for the Prosecution, we have the killer's getting away with it, the detective going off to commit suicide, and there's a sense they might kill again by the end of it. And what we also see by playing up a lot of these horror tropes and playing up with the Gothic irrationality, we find further exploration of the detective's psyche. So in ABC, the ABC murders with Poirot, and then in Witness for the Prosecution with the Mayhew character, who's the lawyer, we have them having nightmares. They have trauma from World War II. So we get these violent flashbacks of what they've been through. And also with a lot of the recent adaptations of Poirot, and the detective is, I'm going to quickly Google the director because it's annoying me, with Kenneth Branagh. So with Kenneth Branagh's recent Poirot adaptations, A Haunting in Venice, for instance, it's the same thing. We lose some of the nuance of the investigation in terms of the interviews and the clues and all of that, but we get more of this kind of backstory of what makes the detective tick, and they are not stable characters that we get in the original books. I mean, Murder on the Orient Express, which is one of the best Agatha Christie books written, was adapted by Kenneth Branagh, and he changes the tone of the book. I mean, the book is fundamentally just a series of interviews. That's what it is. They're sitting on a train having conversations. And it's through those conversations that each character slips up and has clues. But that is not really an action-packed thriller. So what we get with Kenneth Branagh, with a lot of detectives now, is they are not stable characters. They are flawed. They have trauma that we get into. And it's not a question of who did it, what's the solution. We also have this sort of fundamental question: is the detective strong enough to actually get the killer? Because we don't trust them in a lot of these adaptations. They are flawed, vulnerable characters. And I think that is a result of what the Gothic does to contemporary murder mysteries.
You don't know how much I like your approach to this Kenneth Branagh
Yeah,
adaptation, because I hate them.
they're
I
so
have to
bad.
say
I
that.
remember watching Murder on the Orient Express with one of my closest friends. She works in publishing. She owns every Agatha Christie book. We were watching it together and just about to get up and walk out just because it was so bad. It's, I mean, one of the things that fans love about Agatha Christie is the nuance of the puzzle. You know, who are the suspects? Um, what are the clues? And when you're a fan of her work and you know the puzzle and you know how it all comes together, you are watching for those clues and you're watching to see how they are going to present the puzzle. And then when you're watching it and you realize, oh, they're doing something different, it's quite an unsettling feeling because
Unsettling. Yes, because
yeah,
the famous or infamous whodunit is not in the path of the detective. Is he's wondering for another kind of stuff, and the whodunit is losing in the middle of course. Me myself, I know by the heart the other adaptations, even the Mr. Shade adaptation, Peter Austin, of course, all of them, and of course I know by heart the novel. So I don't care who done it. I already know,
yeah,
but I would like to see the. Uh, the way of doing the accomplish of the
mm,
discovery of the crime, but not here. Is
yeah,
where everything you want and say, oh, this is got a resemblance, a movie I used to saw when I was to see when I was a child. It's crazy, but I don't know how Kenneth Branagh, because he's a great actor,
mm,
Shakespearean, a great director, goes for this approach to Mr. Poirot and the crime scene itself. I couldn't understand.
yeah, I agree. And a lot of his films as well, because they are about the detective more so than the crime, we get uh, the focus is on the detective. I mean, the camera literally stays more on Poirot than anyone else in the films, which is a real shame because if you look at each three of his films, The Death on the Nile as well, the cast is incredible.
Yeah,
He
of course.
gets stacked ensemble casts and they're all wasted because we don't really get any meat or nuance with the characters. It is just fundamentally about the psyche of the detective. But that's also why I think I loved Sarah Phelps' adaptation of And Then There Were None, because she was one of the few adapters that were true to the book. Because when that book was adapted for the stage by Agatha Christie, she changed the ending because it was too dark. It was too depressing watching something where they all died. So she had a twist at the end where two survived, they were revealed to be innocent. And so it was a happy ending and they fall in love and that's it. And so a lot of adaptations of that book had that happy ending to the book. And so it really wasn't, there was the Russian version, which I've mentioned, and then there was this BBC series that actually were true to the original ending of it being them all dying.
Con,
Thank you very much for it, your
ah,
enlightening.
Pablo, quisiera, no sé si él llegó, Stuart llegó a revisar esto, pero alguna idea de cómo estas original miniseries fueron publicitadas en su momento como light horror, como adaptaciones de Agatha Christie, qué es lo que se enfatizó en la promoción de estas miniseries.
Oh, Fernando got a very, very interesting question, if I may say. He would like to know if you have the chance to get notice of how these TV series adaptations were announced to the public, like just Agatha Christie adaptation, or horror, or gothic, or criminal crimes, criminal genre, or what? Because it's quite interesting due to the intersection and the stress in the horror side of the story that it was underlying, of course, in the novel, but after this, you said, oh my gosh, he was all the time over there.
So in terms of how they were presented to audiences, BBC would have a release at Christmas. So they would build up to a December release of each series. And I think it was different, like looking at a lot of the promotional material, the trailers and the previews, it was different for each series. So Witness for the Prosecution, the ABC Murders, and Ordeal by Innocence, they were all presented as being, you know, high-end Agatha Christie adaptations. So, I mean, because by that point, ITV had, you know, the long-running series, so Agatha Christie's Poirot and Agatha Christie's Miss Marple, and they were seen, the very well-loved series, but they were seen as very everyday. So in terms of quality TV, they were not that, because they were very regular, often lower budget. I mean, great casts, but they weren't seen as like as prestigious as what the BBC were trying to push these series as. So yeah, so for ABC Murders, Witness for the Prosecution, and Ordeal by Innocence, they were seen as that. I think with if you look at a lot of the promotional material for And Then There Were None, because of the nature of that story, it was presented more of a thriller series. I don't think it was really pitched as a gothic horror as much, though. And Pay the Pale Horse, once again, that is about witches. So we have witches get accused of killing off, or being kind of almost like versions of hitmen. People would go to the witches and seek to have someone killed, and then that person would die by natural causes. So the whole book is about, like, do the witches have power? Are they actually killing people? And so that, you know, played in, a lot of the promotional material played in with a lot of the folk horror elements. So, you know, if you think of films like The Wicker Man or what have you, a lot of those British folk horror tropes, it played in with that. But overall, I would say the emphasis on the Gothic horror was kind of hidden, was beneath the surface in a lot of the promotional material, which once again, which is why I think they were mixed with their reception, because people were wanting, you know, high-end TV series of Agatha Christie, and I think they were that, but I don't think they were expecting it to be as dark. The characters swear, in some of the adaptations, they have sex, they do drugs, they get really drunk, like they do things that don't happen in the original book, and that is scandalous to a lot of viewers.
And Fernando, if I may,
yes,
in this subject, after your critical examination of the Gothic undercurrents in Christie writing, you make a compelling case for the darker tone, of course, as you say, that the Pale Horse and there were known. But given this overt emphasis of atmospheres in modern adaptations, as you said, do you think, let me make the detective, let me ask the questions. Do you think that the original text have an inherent capacity to evoke such darkness, or do you argue that it is in the nature of modern televisual storytelling that brings these elements to fore a ways previously unintended? What do you think about it?
I'm going to be annoying and say it's both. I think what the television series do is they really draw out a lot of those horror motifs. So through a lot of sound, through a lot of, the role of nightmares in each of the series, a lot of the stylistic choices that get used really play up a lot of the horror Gothic tropes. I will say, though, that in a lot of the books, that mood is still there. In the book for And Then There Were None, for the viewers that haven't read it, it's 10 people invited to an island, and they're all accused of having gotten away with murder. And so in the book, a lot of the characters get haunted by the people they've killed. And so it's this feeling of guilt that is haunting them. But the way she writes it with some of the characters, it's as if, they're having visions and the ghosts are there in the room with them. And so in the book, I say it's a version of the fantastic, because we don't know if it's real or not. We don't know if they actually are being haunted or if they're just losing their minds. But that kind of unsettling feeling is in the writing of Agatha Christie. With a lot of other of her adaptations as well, there are moments where characters feel like they are being haunted. So, there's a witch character in Endless Night. There's a seance that I think kills someone in the Siddiford mystery. In Pale Horse, there's this long-running kind of feeling that the witches have power and they are killing people. Often in the books, Agatha Christie reveals it all to be false and that rationality wins. But there are moments in the book where there is still that feeling of the Gothic, that you don't know what's happening.
Great answer. Thank you very much indeed.
Stuart, can you tell us something about your chapter on folk horror and Agatha Christie? It's very amazing thing in Agatha Christie and folk horror. I love that chapter.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, so that so the Pale Horse, which I discuss in that chapter, it was negatively received by a lot of audiences because they changed the book so much. A lot of versions of that story, spoilers, we find out who the killer is. I won't say who it is, but the witches are found out to be frauds. And so, they're found out to be foolish and just women playing with voodoo, basically. But in this version, we get the detective is presented as this like James Bond style figure. He drives a fancy car, sleeping with women. He wears this like very fancy suit. He is representative of London. And so he is accused of, he finds his name on this list. So he feels like he's going to get targeted. And other people on that list were killed supposedly by the witches. And so he goes to this town to investigate. And with folk horror, with a lot of the folk horror, traditional folk horror story that we get in film, like The Wicker Man, or The Devil's Claw, or Satan's Claw, it is this character from the city who is rational, who is our hero, who goes to this country and country town and finds this kind of dark secret. There are witches, or there's this occult, or something's happening, and it's through the land, right? So it's very atmospheric. It's sort of, you know, Satan possessing animals or what have you, and that attacks this man who was our hero, right? But what I think what Sarah Phelps does, which I think is really clever, is that she subverts it. So, you know, I won't spoil the ending, but what she does in terms of who the actual killer is, who the good people are, and who has the power, she plays with our expectations of folk horror in terms of how we think it's going to play out, and she completely subverts it.
Y
Amazing. Amazing.
mi última pregunta, Pablo, es ¿qué considera Stuart
Yes.
que serialidad de televisión, TV seriality, adds to an Agatha Christie adaptation? What Stuart think that the serial format of TV can add to a Agatha Christie adaptation?
Well, I think by nature of it being a miniseries, that format allows for depth. So it allows for a lot of the nuance to play out. So if you, just by the nature of you having your detective character, your victim, and a handful of suspects who are the ensemble cast, you are dealing with a big cast. And in order for the mystery to work, you need to have all members of that ensemble cast having the space to be a suspect, to give red herrings, to, you know, be developed as characters, to, you know, have pathos, basically. And often if you have a feature-length film, sometimes by, you know, the nature of adapting it from the book to the film, you need to make sacrifices because you can't adapt everything from the book, basically. So a lot of the feature films, which is where I think Kenneth Branagh gets into trouble, I think, because he sacrifices so much of the ensemble cast and the characterization development to fit it in with the parameters of a feature-length film. But by having a miniseries, you get to really play with a lot of the beats of an episode. So it's really interesting how they play with the cliffhanger at each end of each episode, and certain reveals that will happen. But it also fundamentally gives you the space to really explore that narrative that maybe a feature-length film can't do.
Okay.
All right.
Pablo, ¿quieres alguna pregunta?
Yes, the last question for me is, but you know, being horror writer, I got questions about characters. I got questions about the craft of the mystery, the crime itself. But in this case, being you are really leading authority in the work of Miss Agatha Christie, let me say, you, sir, that you exude your professor way of explaining and your passion and your really commitment with the over of our good friend Agatha Christie, and it is delighted to hear you explaining us and open our minds to this new channel of perception of reality that at last is what the detective is trying to find in order to discover who is the criminal. But my question is just a personal question about, for you, who was the best impersonator of Mr. Hercule Poirot? Do you have one?
Yes, I'm just going to confirm the actor's name. Albert Finney, of course, I think is good. But my favorite, and I'm just Googling his name because I want to get it right. Yeah, no, it is Albert Finney, who does the 1974 adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express. I would say his characterization, I think it was probably the first one that really captured the quirks of Hercule Poirot. David Suchet, who does many versions of many episodes of Hercule Poirot, he is the best. Like he's done it the most. But I think Albert Finney, there's something special about him. She saw Agatha Christie saw that film and she liked it, and she liked his depiction of Poirot as well. So I think that's pretty special, and that is a great adaptation of that book as well.
Yes, he did. I couldn't agree more. Yes, indeed. Yeah. Of course, for me, Suchet is the Poirot much in my mind, much more than Peter Ustinov, but Albert Finney was absolutely great because I think he can, act like a medium that be possessed, but the real Poirot, if we could say real Poirot. Borges say that why we can consider the Quixote as a friend of ours, if the Quixote is already a character, but a person. So for me,
in that film, I think he's acting against, looking at the rest of the cast, there's Sean Connery, Anthony Perkins, Ingrid Bergman, Lauren Bacall, like huge, big performers, and he stands his own against them. So
you couldn't miss the shot. Yes.
Yeah.
Stuart, can you show us
indeed.
your book cover?
There we go.
There is Agatha
Christie
Gothic Horror.
Is it the right way for you, or is it presenting back to front the text?
Okay.
Lovely.
Great.
Lovely.
Muchísimas thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you very much. Para terminar, Pablo, que nos cuente si está investigando algo nuevo o qué está escribiendo o cuál es su investigación actual.
Yes, Stuart, we used to finish this kind of interview, and I say that I regret to say finish because I stay the whole day long listening to your wisdom and your sense of, even your sense of humor about these very interesting crossroads where you find this amazing discovery. But what are you up to for these days? Are you working in, if you can tell us, of course?
So I have, I've got a book coming out in January. I believe with some colleagues, we've written about the history of Australian queer film and television. That looks at the whole history of Australian queer film and television, from sort of early cinema to today. So that's coming out in January.
Okay.
Good.
Bueno,
I
entonces
can remember.
le agradecemos,
Yes.
Pablo,
Sorry.
a Stuart, le agradecemos muchísimo su tiempo. Very, very, very happy to have you here. Thanks for your time. It's an amazing book, as an amazing analysis of Agatha Christie on TV. Thank you very much, Stuart.
My
Thanks.
pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, no. We really appreciate you exude passion and love and criticism in the good way of you can say Agatha Christie once again. What
Yes.
can be said? Fresh, and you got you nailed the point, sir. And let me tell you, we really appreciate your sharing, your generosity to open your knowledge to our audience. That for sure will enjoy all and want to more, of course. And we encourage to go for your book, even though it's in English. But really, in the name of our audience, I have to say thank you very much indeed for your time, your generosity, and your wisdom about one of our young loves, like Miss Agatha Christie
Thank you so
work.
much. Thank you so much.
All right.
Oh,
Right.
bye, people. Bye,
Bye.
Stuart.
Good luck with the conference.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.